Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1991 action film, The Last Boy Scout. Now, The Last Boy Scout to me is a terrific, just absolutely amazing and badass action film. Like, this film, to me personally, is not only one of Bruce Willis's best films in his filmography, but it's also one of the best films of the genre, period. Like, I think this is absolutely one of the best action films, and one of the best action films from the 1990s. I don't know why it didn't do as well as it should have when it came out in 1991. It really does suck that it underperformed for the studio. I don't know why critics were so middling when it comes to this movie. I don't know why it got like a 46% overall. I don't get it. Yeah, it's a film that's very cynical, but it's one of those rare movies where its cynicism doesn't make the movie so dour that it's not any fun. And on top of that, when it comes to the action, like it really does deliver on that front. It's just a movie that's just so tremendous on so many levels. It just scores so many points on the scoreboard. It's directed by Tony Scott, and I think he did a tremendous, just absolutely stellar job directing this movie. I've always felt that Tony Scott was a great filmmaker. I miss him dearly, and I don't think he really got enough credit for how good of a filmmaker he really was. Tony Scott was one of the most consistent filmmakers of his time when it comes to the overall quality of his films. I personally feel that he was even more consistent than his more popular and critically acclaimed brother, Ridley, because you really knew what you were going to get from Tony. You were going to get a really strong overall product. You were going to get direction that was slick, was stylish, but also had a lot of real talent behind it and strong technique. Like that's what you were going to get from Tony Scott. And The Last Boy Scout is no exception to that. I mean, it's just another really well shot film by Tony Scott. The action sequences are shot in ways where it just provides the purest adrenaline rush. And he shot a variety of action for this film: car chases, shootouts, fisticuffs. And it was all shot in a way where it just got you. It grabbed you. It provided the most impact. It hit the hardest. And even in sequences that were not involving action, those were also scenes that popped and really did leave their mark. And despite the movie being very dark visually, it didn't look dull. Like it still had a certain look to it that was very slick and still had a lot of style. Still had a lot of uh, pizzazz, so to speak, despite the fact that it was a film that honestly didn't have a lot of bright colors and wasn't very flashy in that capacity. And he also just managed to really get the peak performance from his cast and from his crew. And for a film that is known for having such a difficult production, none of that really showed up on the screen. And that's another thing that you can really provide a lot of praise to Tony Scott for, because he was really good at that as well. Like being the best possible captain of the ship, despite things just going to hell in the handbasket on the set of the movie. He still managed to get people to continue to show up, managed to still get great performances from the cast despite how much they hated shooting the film and hated being on the movie or hated each other. And it's a film that you really would never think for a second that it had such a tumultuous production based on the film itself, based on the ultimate product. And that's in a lot of ways due to Tony Scott and his consistencies. And it just really did show up in so many different ways with this film and with all of his films. Just just a very consistent, very solid filmmaker. And you could see the influence that other filmmakers would ultimately take from his work as well. I mean, look at Michael Bay, for instance. Michael Bay's films, you could see a lot of Tony Scott inspiration in his movies, especially when it comes to the way that the films are shot, the way that Tony used certain colors and certain looks for his films, and also the way that Tony just captured speed and on film and captured an action sequence. So you could see a lot of that with filmmakers like Michael Bay and others long after Tony's passing. But yeah, I mean, Tony Scott is a guy I can't sing enough praises for. And one of these days, I honestly would love to do a video just going through his filmography and just really celebrating the man's career. And I think I did that. I might have done that at one point years ago, but I think he's still a guy that should be talked about more. Just like this movie. Like, this movie deserves more recognition, and in turn, so does the director, Tony Scott. Now, the film also features a spectacular script by Shane Black. This is, in my opinion, one of his best, and it's definitely one of his wittiest, one of his funniest scripts. Has some of the best lines, and on top of that, I also think it has a really good plot. It has one of the best opening sequences that I've seen from Shane Black. The opening sequence with the football player who is desperate, and the bookies are after him, and he's got to score a touchdown. He's got to win the game, otherwise he's toast. The desperation, the insanity in that opening scene, where the football player just brings out a fucking gun and starts shooting people on the field and then blows his fucking brains out. That's the kind of stuff that is brilliant. Like, it really is. It's a brilliant writing because it just hooks you from the very first few sequences. Like, once you get to that scene, you're like, oh my god, what the fuck is this movie gonna do next? And the film has a lot of really high octane bit of action, a lot of variety of action in the story throughout the screenplay, but at the same time, just manages to be so unique when it comes to its tone. It's a very cynical, very dark movie. You've got your hero who honestly has this fuck the world mentality, but at the same time, this is a hero that you still like, despite him being uh pretty unsavory at times, not really being the best guy. He's fucked up and he's very flawed, but he's still written in a way where he's still a character that you really do want to go along for the ride with. You want him to get himself out of the gutter, so to speak. You want him to survive. You want him to be able to dance a jig at the end of the movie because he's found a way out of it. And the character, in a lot of ways, was an extension of Shane Black because he had retired or took a break from writing films for a couple years because he was dealing with a bad breakup. And he took a lot of his personal pain and angst and bitterness and he put it into the character of Joe Hallenbeck. And that really does show. A big reason why this character feels so raw and so real is because Shane Black was writing this character from a very raw and real place. And Joe isn't the only one that's well written and fleshed out. I felt that Jimmy Dix was also a well written character, a disgraced football player who was banned from the league for betting on games, and he wasted his talent, and he's bitter in that regard. So you have a bitter ex Secret Service guy who was fired from his job even after he saved the president because he wasn't going to put up with any bullshit from this corrupt politician who was beating on women in secrecy, and he was disgraced and just completely removed from his position, and that's taken its toll on him, as well as his relationship with his wife. And then he starts to connect with Jimmy because they both are in a similar place. They both are down on their luck. They both have had similar stories of falling from grace, and they start to form a genuine bond with one another. And the way that these two characters are written when it comes to the scenes that they share with one another is very special. Just instant chemistry. And it's not just because of the cast, but it's a big part of it. And I'll get to that later. But also, I mean, this script, it just gives these performers so much to work with. There are a lot of just absolutely uproarious lines of dialogue and moments in this film. I, I mean, one of the first sequences that involve Joe, he's hung over in the back of a car. His two kids are fucking with him. They throw a dead squirrel into the car. He wakes up and he's all like, "Oh fuck, did I fuck a squirrel last night?" It's the kind of stuff that's absurd, but it's hilarious. And it just continues. You got stuff with this guy who gives Joe jobs, and he's supposedly one of Joe's last few friends, and then he finds out that he's fucking his wife, and you have a great line of dialogue where he's like, "Oh no, 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 it was an accident, right? I just accidentally tripped and slipped and fell and slipped my dick into your wife. No big deal." Stuff like that, and just the audacity of a lot of these jokes. It's kind of stuff that today would not be considered acceptable, but that's a big reason why it holds up so well now, because it's like, fuck it. It has this whole sort of fuck it attitude with the humor and the jokes. I mean, there's a whole scene where Joe is distracting this guy who's trying to kill him in an alley with jokes about the guy's wife. And I just cannot sing enough praises for this script. Even the way that it writes Joe's daughter. That character is written in a way that's very refreshing because she's got a foul mouth, she's got a temper, she's got an attitude, and it's something that you didn't see a whole lot of with a character that young. And I guess a lot of people kind of didn't think that kids would act that way, but I mean that's a very normal, natural thing, especially for a young kid who's growing up in an environment where that kind of behavior, that kind of attitude is something that's the norm. So it makes sense that she's just a further extension of her dad in terms of her personality and her attitude overall. And I also really just like the corruption angle when it comes to sports and football. I'm a huge fan of NFL football, of football in general, and it's just a very unique take on football for a movie. It shows a nightmarish look of what football could turn into. The whole sort of thing where what if football was no longer as profitable? What if it wasn't getting as good of ratings? What if it became desperate? Then you would see stuff where a lot of the owners and a lot of the other people involved with the sport would start to bend the rules. They would start to take more chances in order to maintain profitability. And so it makes sense that they would start to make deals with the mob or with other powerful nefarious figures so they could continue to have a revenue. And it's a plot that it was right for the time, but nowadays it actually is kind of not that big of a deal because of the fact that gambling has been legalized and the NFL is working with Vegas now and so on. So it's not really a far fetched kind of thing like it might have been in 1991, where it's one of those things where, oh no, legalize gambling, legalize sports gambling, like what a sin, what a horrible thing. And nowadays, like, it's not that big of a deal, but it does make you think though, like, what are the repercussions going to be now that sports gambling is legal? And I think you will see more instances where you're going to see some more corruption. You're going to see some more things where you'll look at the score or you'll look who wins and you're like, wait a minute, like that seemed a little too not necessarily predictable, but that seemed a little bit too close to the spread. The way that things happened seemed a little bit too set up. You're gonna see a lot of that stuff, and I think you're already starting to see some of that stuff now when it comes to the fact that betting is illegal now. So people are only human, so I would not be surprised at all if there's some really shady stuff going on behind the scenes when it comes to professional sports due to the fact that betting is now legal. But that's a whole other story altogether. But yeah, just a really just spectacular script in terms of the way that the characters are written, when it comes to really uh, big, grand moments for these characters to shine, when it comes to the overall plot with its gripping opening sequence, and then how it just continues to put the pedal to the metal and just get first down after first down and just careen right into the end zone. Just a really excellent script overall. And as great as the script is, I think in a lot of ways you could argue the MVP of this film is Bruce Willis as Joe Hallenbeck. Like, Bruce Willis was just the perfect casting, the perfect guy to play this character. Because this is a character that's not the most, let's just say, savory kind of character. He's a very unsavory kind of guy, very rough, very raw kind of character. He's very imperfect and very flawed. But Bruce Willis was the kind of actor in his prime who could take these kind of characters and give them a heart of gold and make them a character that you genuinely loved to watch and you rooted for them and you wanted them to get on the straight and narrow. You wanted them to make it out in the end and be able to dance a jig. And speaking of dancing a jig, I mean, that's a silly scene, but Bruce just sold it so well. And he was just so willing to put everything out there. And what could be considered embarrassing for a lesser actor or some other kind of performer, he turned it into something that was endearing. Just another endearing aspect of his performance. And he's a guy who's believable when it comes to the action, but he's also a guy who's believable when it comes to being a normal guy. Like, he plays a lot of these larger than life characters, but they still are grounded in a way where he plays these guys that feel like there's someone that you might know, and someone that you definitely want to be around, even with their rougher edges. So that's the thing. You just found Bruce Willis was just an absolute technician when it comes to taking these kind of characters and just really providing the best possible output from them. That's why I feel, yeah, he's the MVP. He's the most valuable player when it comes to The Last Boy Scout, because Joe Hallenbeck is the main character, and he's a very cynical kind of guy, but the way that Bruce Willis played this character was just so perfect and just so strong and consistent that it was a character that you still really enjoyed to watch. And you bought into it. You believed it. You believed the cynicism, but you also believed the heart that this character had. Damon Wayans, I think he also did a really solid job as Jimmy Dix. I thought he had his own dynamic elements that he provided to his performance. I thought he and Bruce Willis made a good team. I thought that they had some good chemistry. And when it comes to the action sequences that Jimmy is a part of, I thought Damon looked the part, and I didn't think that he was forcing things or he seemed like he was out of place. I've always felt that Damon Wayans was a standout performer in his own right when it comes to this film. It's a damn shame that Damon Wayans didn't really take this film and this performance and take the ball and run with it afterwards. It was one of those things where I don't know what happened, because it really does seem like Damon could have been a bigger star after The Last Boy Scout, because he showed that he could easily hold his own against one of the bigger stars at the time in Bruce Willis, but it just didn't work out. It just didn't pan out in his favor for whatever reason. It might have been him, because I've heard some things about what Damon did when it comes to his film career. He kind of just picked some of the wrong projects, or he had his own issues with working with others. But whatever it was, it ultimately still was a shame, because I've always liked Damon Wayans. I felt he was hilarious in Living Color, and definitely one of the better performers from that cast. And I always felt that he had more range and more talent than a lot of people gave him credit for. And this is a definite example of that. I would say probably his best performance when it comes to his film work. You also have Chelsea Field, who plays Sarah, Bruce Willis's wife. She's fine too, but she's not really in it a whole lot. You got Noble Willingham, who plays the villainous scumbag owner of this football team, Shelley. Taylor Negron, he plays a hitman named Milo, and this is a very malicious and malevolent performance. And this is a guy who I remember more from comedies. I remember him as the guy in Nothing But Trouble who's complaining about a pickle shooting train, or the guy in Angels in the Outfield who's babysitting the two kids and sits in a pile of nachos and gets nacho butt. Like, I remember Taylor Negron for those kind of roles. But I will also remember him for his role as Milo, because he just did a marvelous job playing this character. This is a character that in a lot of ways doesn't have a ton of screen time, but Taylor Negron just makes the most out of it. He just created a character that was just so sinister and so vicious, and definitely felt like a legitimate match to Bruce Willis. Danielle Harris from Halloween 4 and 5. She's in this as Darian, Joe Hallenbeck's daughter, and she was great. She was as energetic and just fun as always. I really loved seeing her in this. It was a great bit of casting, playing this kid who, in a lot of ways, is a lot like her father, with the foul mouth and the fuck it kind of attitude. Halle Berry, she has a little small role as Corey, Jimmy's girlfriend. Um, she's definitely quite sexy in this, and definitely brings a sex appeal. And I think the scenes that she did share with Damon Wayans were good. I just wish they there was a little bit more with the two in terms of their relationship. Would have made those two characters kind of pop a little more. Bruce McGill, he was good in his little cameo, not necessarily cameo, but little role as Mike, Joe's friend who betrays him and starts fucking his wife. Kim Coates, he plays this guy named Chet, and he works for Shelly and Milo, and he's the guy who gets uppercut. He gets hit in the nose and killed by Joe in one of the more iconic scenes in the film. Touch me again, and I'll kill you. Bam! Bump up, baby! And then he just the guy just falls dead. I told you. God, I love that scene. I love that scene. Kim Coates is a big reason why that scene works as well as it does too, because he just played that role so well. Like, what an asshole. Like, what a fucking prick. Chelsea Ross played another great prick as the Senator Calvin Baynard. Chelsea Ross, he always played those guys just so well. The kind of just slimy scumbag types. Billy Blanks is in this in a small role as well. He played Billy Cole in the beginning. He played the football player who snapped and shot people on the field and then blew his head off. Like, wow, I mean, shit. I remember when I first saw this, I'm like, who is that guy? He looks familiar. And then I'm like, oh, it's Billy Blanks. It's the Tybo guy. He definitely wasn't shooting blanks then. But yeah, just a really strong, great cast overall. Featured some good cinematography by Ward Russell for the kind of film that it is. Very hazy, smoky kind of film. In a lot of ways, it matched the location that the film was taking place in Los Angeles, with all the smog and everything. The editing by Stuart Baird, Mark Goldblatt, Mark Helfrich. I thought for a film that probably, I think it did have like a fair amount of edits, because there is like a uncut version out there that has like more violence and more scenes, because it actually was shown at a movie theater fairly recently. It was uncovered in a vault somewhere, and there are some moments where with the editing where you can kind of tell that maybe some stuff might have been trimmed a little bit or cut, but it didn't really seem to be something that looked like it was too choppy. I feel the film is still well edited overall, despite the fact that there are some moments where you're like, okay, maybe something might be missing here. And the editing is also another big reason why the action is so awesome in this film. Why it really is such a giant adrenaline rush. And also why some of the humor lands so well, because it's very sharp, and the editing is also very quick as well. Like it really does tie into the film's wit and the tone and the film's tone. And that's like a trifecta of just really talented editors there. Stuart Baird, Mark Goldblatt, Mark Helfrich. The film also featured a score by Michael Kamen. I will say at times it sounded a little bit too much like Die Hard. Like the producers were like, we want a Die Hard score because Die Hard is a huge film and a big popular action movie, and we want some of that. We want some of that flavor in our movie. And I get it, but I don't know. I would have liked to have seen or heard bits from Michael Kamen that weren't something that was so familiar. But at the same time, there are some other moments where his score works. It's rollicking. It's fun. I feel his rendition of the Monday Night Football theme, for instance, that is definitely a major highlight. I think he's the one that composed that as well. And it's a score that works. It's effective, but I wouldn't say that it's one of his best. But at the end of the day, it's still definitely is something that helps the film rather than hurts it. The movie has like a 105-minute running time, and it goes by quick. I mean, it is a film that is just tremendously entertaining and enjoyable to watch. It doesn't really have any moments, to me personally, where it drags, where it loses your interest. It just keeps going head on with a full head of steam, like a running back in the open field. There's just nothing but open field, and the running back has got a good block, and he's just running for the end zone, and no one touches him by the time he gets there. And it's a touchdown. It's a touchdown of a movie. Like it is a film that I honestly could say I could watch over and over again and not get tired of. And overall, highly recommend it. Highly recommend The Last Boy Scout. In a lot of ways, The Last Boy Scout was kind of one of the last kind of films like it in terms of this cynical but fun action movie. Because you had some other stuff afterwards that tried to do that too, but not at this scale and not with this kind of approach. And it's just a movie that I absolutely love. I love The Last Boy Scout. Cannot get enough of this film. Anyway, thank you for watching my review of the movie. And as always, I'll see you later. And remember, folks, Satan Claus, he's out there.